Welcome to Mental Stillness. My name is Derek, and I am excited that somehow you stumbled across this podcast. So let's jump into it. So with this topic, mental stillness, there's a little bit of a play on words, obviously. As I was looking at, this is called the deep dive, right? Deep dive is where you're at if you didn't know. And this past summer, you ever been on YouTube and you start looking at like maybe a live performance, and then you end up looking at how someone disassembles a toaster and you're like, wow, we've come a long way. How did we get from here to here? And so that's kind of where I was. Over the summer, I love watching live concerts, clips on YouTube. And somehow one of the recommended videos following a music festival was, hey, this guy is going for the world free dive record. This guy named Alexei Malkadov, he's a Russian diver. And what he was doing, he was going to set the previous record and try to beat it, and it was like 461 feet was the previous record that he set the year before. He was going to beat himself the next year, and he made it 463 feet on one breath. 463 down, 463 back up. If you're doing the math, we're talking about like 3 football fields in total length. Is that not insane? 4, and he's sitting there, and you're watching him, he's on video. Look it up on YouTube later, not now. He's sitting there prepping to go down. He's doing all these like wild breathing exercises, getting his lungs ready. He's mastered the skill of breathing. And then I went from the live concert to then talking about, watching this Russian free diver set this world record. Then I got on Google and I'm like, how do people hold their breath that long? You start to kind of go this other. And one of the things that showed up said, yes, when you're talking about free diving, it's absolutely important to understand the breathing. Obviously, you need a breath to spend however many minutes going 463 feet to the bottom of the ocean and back up. But it said the thing that people don't think about, and one of the most important things free divers have to do if they're going to get to a depth, is they have to deal with pressure. Every couple feet a freediver goes down, he has to equalize the pressure. If not, blood vessels in the eye rupture, the ears, all this wild stuff happens. And so they master the art, yes, of breathing, but honestly, it sounds like they got to do a whole lot more dealing with pressure. And when I think about that, I'm like, okay, if pressure is inevitable with diving, I think it's also fair to say pressure is inevitable with leadership. And you guys know this. I'm seeing heads nod right now. You started as a team member, then you got team lead, and you're like, oh, this is different. Then you turn into an assistant director or whatever, executive director, all the way up, and you're like, I didn't know this was going to be this hard. I mean, it's easy to feel, the amount of pressure that you guys feel on a given day. And I'm here to say that comes with leadership. That comes with leadership. And so it's not like we can avoid it. I don't want that to be all is lost. But I do want to talk today about what are some healthy ways we can deal with that. And that's not a bad thing. Here's the thing about pressure. In leadership, pressure is felt because what you're doing or what you're about to do matters. There's pressure with that. It's not easy, but it's something I want to strive to. I want to help our team strive towards because it matters. So I want to talk today, I want to give you a few things in regards to dealing with pressure. You should have got a sticker. If you don't have a sticker, raise your hand. Is Karen still in here? There we go. They're like, give me my sticker. I didn't come here to hear you. I came for my sticker. So Karen, everybody give Karen a hand. Thank you, Karen. So somebody yell out, what is on that sticker? What number? 80%. So we're going to talk about 80%, and I want to tell you a couple things that are fascinating when it comes to the psychology, especially in life and leadership, around this 80% number, okay? So we're going to jump into that. The very first one, negative thoughts. If you can't read it because the sun is working against me right now, that says negative thoughts. 80%. What if I told you that you had 6,000 thoughts in a day? Would that shock anybody? Good, because it's actually 60,000. Every single day, we have 60,000 thoughts. If you think about it, that's kind of basing not a 24-hour day, the cut 8 hours for sleep, in 16 hours, we're having 60,000 thoughts. 60,000 thoughts. And 80% of that is negative. 48,000 thoughts a day on average is negative. All of us. You're probably like, Derek, I don't know if I believe that. I'm a positive person. As a positive person, you might be at 42,000 negative thoughts a day, okay? But yeah, on average, 48,000. And if you think about even just 60,000 thoughts a day, in 16 hours, to give you kind of where the numbers land, so that means in 16 hours, every hour you're having 3,600 thoughts. Every minute, you're having 63 thoughts, which is a little over 1 point whatever thoughts per second. And 80% are negative. So that's an amazing stat. And the thing that's interesting about it is it's kind of our default. And there's some good things about that. A few weeks ago, I was clearing out, probably closer to a couple months ago, I was clearing out some debris behind our garage. I lifted a rock. What was under the rock? A snake. I don't like snakes. From like lifting a rock to being about 3 feet suspended in the air in a nanosecond. And that's because my brain kind of was in autopilot, realizing that that's not good for you. Get away. And so it's actually a good thing. It's actually a great thing that we kind of are constantly surveying our surroundings, surveying the environment. And it's like, hey, what is dangerous? How do I keep my distance? How do I avoid it? How do I stay safe? And our brain works on our behalf in that kind of environment. The problem is, what if there's not a snake? What if it's just a coworker that wants to give you some feedback, wants to have a coaching conversation, right? And some of the internal feelings we still feel is the same as if it was a snake, but it's not. It's someone that's actually in your corner. But on our side of things, we interpret around us. We kind of get swept in maybe some negativity. We get swept in just that kind of negative mindset. And all of a sudden, he or she's the enemy. They're not here. They're not really in my corner. And so left to our own devices, all of us, you could be the most positive person in the room. Our needle is going to lean towards the negative side if we don't intervene, if we don't recognize it, if we don't try to do something different with it, okay? So that's one. 80% are negative, and it's interesting if you even do that exercise yourself, like where in my life have I maybe been caught up in a season of negativity or maybe just kind of seeing things a little more fearfully or with, for me, I have a history of calling 911. When I haven't needed to call, okay, I should qualify it with that. When not needing to call 911, I have called 911, especially as a kid. First time, I thought there was someone, and I had watched some wacky, scary movie when I was way too young to watch it. I thought someone was in my kitchen with a ski mask. I could see it all in my head. I heard this noise in the middle of the night, sat up. Instead of telling a mature adult, I just said, I'll just tell an adult, but over the phone after I call 911. So I called 911, and long story short, it was the ice maker. So that's sometimes, how often do you, I'll put it back on you, how often do you immediately jump into a decision or jump into a mindset or jump into some kind of place of fear or anxiousness because you think you know what's around the corner? And instead of taking some time to maybe investigate or to pause or really see, is this something that's real or is this something imagined? Is this something that, we just kind of knee-jerk reaction. We say the thing that's hurtful. We avoid the person that we think the worst of. So 80% of the time, it's just something for all of us to be mindful of. When it comes to fear, this is super helpful for me, and I'm just going to say it. This is kind of a side road. A lot of times, fear and anxiousness looks like 4 categories. I'm going to give you those categories. This is good to write down, for you to reflect on, to think about. Regret of the past. Specifically in your involvement. I should have, I wish, I would have. So regret of the past. Another one is fear of the future. Sidebar, with those two first ones, depression feels a lot like regret of the past, and anxiety looks a whole lot like fear of the future. Here's a big one. Unhealthy comparison of myself in regards to others. I'm seeing some head nods. It's true for all of us. Again, our brain's working. Not only where do I stand with myself, where do I stand with the people around me? Unhealthy comparison. The fourth one, self-blame. How many times do we think of ourselves a whole lot differently than we think about the person next to us that you're sitting next to today? If you had a coaching conversation with yourself, would it sound a whole lot different than it would with a coaching conversation with the person next to you? You'd be a whole lot harder on yourself. It's easy to extend the grace to someone there. It's really hard to give that same grace to ourselves. So regret of the past, fear of the future, unhealthy comparison of others, and self-blame. Next category here for 80%, so we talked 80% of our thoughts being negative, is 80% of the time, the things that we're thinking about, the things we're worried about, the things that we're sitting in the shower and processing and having this conversation, 80% of those things don't even happen. They just don't happen. I love this question. How much energy have you wasted on things that have never materialized? We all do it. I'll give you a hint, it's actually higher than 80%. Cornell University came out with a study in the last 5 years that bumped this number up. It's actually, I think, closer to 85, but that would have really worked against me with my three stats that are going to be 80%, okay? So 80% of the things we get so fixated on, that we ruminate on, they don't materialize. And so I think in your all's context, I get that text, maybe it's from your operator, maybe it's from your supervisor. How many of us immediately start filling in the blanks as to what that future conversation is going to involve? Raise your hand if that's ever happened. And then, back to our first point, that future conversation, is it, as you think about that, as you process that, as you kind of get fixated on that, how many times is that something to do with negative about yourself? We start to think, you can see how these can kind of start working against us. So what's that make us do? We have this fear around the corner, this thing that we're getting hyper fixated on that's like, it's going to be, I'm getting fired. Or, I don't know what they want to talk about. It must be bad. And I love asking this question. When you think about fear, when we think about anxiety, we think about pressure, and you may be like, I don't really. Some of you may be like, I'm struggling to even like pinpoint what it is I'm fearful of. Another way to ask yourself: do you all know what the best friend of fear is? Anybody? What is the best friend of fear? Can I give you the answer? Avoidance. You never have a fear without an avoidance right there. So sometimes it's really easy. You may be struggling to think about I don't really know. I know I feel a certain way, but I can't pinpoint what the fear is. And I think looking through the other lens of what have you been kicking down the road? Who have you been avoiding may be a good question. I hope I don't get scheduled with that person. Don't look to your right or left right now. The last one here with the 80% rule. So we talked about negative thoughts. We talked about how that led me to call 911 handful of times. And we talked about 80% things never happen that we kind of get consumed with. Can I just say I love this last one? So if 80% of the time the thing we get fixated on, the thing we're worried about never happens, that leaves us with 20% over here that kind of does, right? at least a version of it, or you may be asked to have a conversation. It ends up being maybe a hard conversation, a challenging conversation. So that may happen. The third 80% with this is that 80% of the time, when the things do happen or a version of them do happen, 80% of the time they go better than expected. But I like talking about this with leaders because you all know this, like leaders define culture, right? I mean, you just heard Mark talking about it. Leaders determine culture. And so when we get this right, that has a ton of payoff, a ton of influence on the organization. And we love using the word synonymously, leader and influencer, you know, not the social media influencer, but leaders have influence. You can't be a leader and not have influence. The problem sometimes that's not great influence. You guys have seen that play out. You got some people who are maybe leading the organization, the culture in a negative way. Leaders are going to lead people somewhere. And this, you guys hearing this material and hearing this of like recognizing our own biases, kind of where we lean, if we can get a healthy picture of really what's going on and we can get that right, that is going to pay off into the culture that you're trying to create. It doesn't happen passively. We're not going to drift there. We're not going to wake up one day and be like, I have arrived passively. No, it takes work. And it also takes people to your right and left who also are on this journey with you. So 80% negative thoughts, 80% never happens, 80% of the things go better than expected. And just because you have a thought does not mean it's true, and it does not mean that it's you. Just the presence of a thought does not mean it has to have power. There's a lot of wacky things that come across our brain that we think about ourselves, that we think about other people, and we have the choice, back to what Randy said earlier, we have the choice to kind of let it stick or just let it kind of float on down the river. I don't want to just look, here's the negativity, here's the hard things, and I'm just going to like look here and avoid it. I just want us to put everything on the table. We want to allow the positive to also be beside the negative so we see it all. Life change happened. There's transformation. Look how this leader came in here. Never thought they would make it to here. Let's see those things. We want to see a full picture. So the questions. I love this. I'm going to read this. A couple self-check questions that as you find yourself, if you're confused, well, you know, am I maybe leaning into some of this negativity a bit more than I want to or that I need to? Have I faced this challenge before is such a good question. We want to see everything on the table, remember? Have I faced this same challenge before? How did it turn out last time? You might find this is a great way to indicate, is this one of the things I've been fixated on that may not happen, you know, fall in that category? Am I making the problem too big and myself too small? This is such a big one when it comes to anxiety, okay? Here's what happens. We allow the thing that we're concerned, the pressure we're feeling, the thing we're worried about, we see it as this growing monster. We get in our head about it. You know, it gets really big. And as the monster's growing, we're shrinking. And so anxiety is we've made the thing too big and we've dropped ourselves too low. We don't have an accurate picture of where we stand in relation to this mythical beast that 80% of the time is not going to be a mythical beast. So we get out of balance. And that makes us want to, back to our avoid word, avoid. Because if this was true, of course I would avoid. Of course I would have delayed the inevitable. Because that thing is way too big for this thing. But seeing the full picture says, you know what, like I have experience. And you know what, I may not be great in that area, but the person to my right, they have some things I can lean into. They care for me. They want the best for me. I have an operator that cares for me, that wants the best for me. Let's restore an accurate picture of really what's going on. To this point, am I letting other people carry this with me? I know there's been times where you guys have felt like the responsibilities of this role are too much for me, or too much for anybody. And the reality is that's probably true if you had to do it completely on your own. But who are the other people that can help you? Who do you need to train? Who do you need to kind of step into something? What can you give to somebody else as a stretch opportunity? Am I feeling this way for some other reason? Maybe there's something else going on. Is this self-induced from my negative thinking? Is this an 80% issue? And do I need outside help / support? That might be friend, family. It might be professional. Maybe this is beyond just more of a mindset. Maybe it is something at a clinical level. I tell people this all the time because anxiety is the number one thing the most common thing we diagnose. It's also the highest rate of treatability. There's the most opportunity when it comes to anxiety, stress. So if you're in that camp, I just want to verbalize that to be like, hey, seek out support and help. If it's at a level that's really debilitating, talk to somebody. It's highly, highly treatable.